Hey everybody. I'm not kind of used to talking, as we already said, so if you want to keep any rotten fruit to the end of the presentation, that would be useful. If you do have any questions throughout, just jump in. I like to keep this kind of back and forth as much as I can. As Mark said, I'm CTO of a company called Bloo.ie. It's what keeps me stressed most of the day, but it's one of these things that essentially allows me to do things that I love with technology, so that's what I'm here to talk about today. So a little bit about me. I like JavaScript now. I got the fortunate chance to start doing JavaScript professionally in 2009. Did it more than half the time in 2010, and nowadays I do absolutely everything I can in JavaScript. So I'm front end, back end, build tools, you name it, it's in JavaScript. The road to where I am right now has been a bit rocky. It's taught me some interesting lessons. I'm not sure all of them are necessarily good. So in 2009, it was JavaScript heavy front end. Everything in the back end was .NET. It was 3.5, it was greenfield, everything was wonderful. It was just before 4.0 came out. Unfortunately, I had to target IE only. And not only was it IE only, it was IE6 only. And that was an absolutely horrific experience for me. I started learning some really interesting tricks using Google to figure out how to do JavaScript at this stage, such as setting the search tools into the past to ask questions, so that not getting people who are answering real JavaScript questions with real JavaScript interpreters, people back when IE6 was around asking that sort of question. Yeah, that wasn't fun. Next up, I had another chance to start a new company. Well, I didn't start the company, I started in a new company. It was greenfield. It was a thick client JavaScript app using Kookstoo. Has anybody ever heard of Kookstoo? Yeah, there's a reason for that. It was a little bit horrific. It's kind of like Sprout, but more like somebody forced Java into Sprout Core. It was a bit horrific. And to top it all off, we used SOAP as the communication protocol, and we actually had to write the SOAP deserializer. Yeah, that was again a little bit horrific. So, learning my bad lessons of how not to do things, I got to start Bloo.ie in 2011. We're still here, which is great. And again, because it's a new company, everything was greenfield. But that meant that I had to make the decisions as to what to use. Since 2011, I've been kind of collecting good ways to do JavaScript stuff. Actually, I think on my Twitter it says something about liking best practices. So if I give this talk, past Chris gave this talk, it would be just a collection of things that you should do in structuring your apps and stuff. But nowadays, the message is don't write any code at all. I'm very much into conventional configuration nowadays. You may have heard of this guy called Yehuda Katz, kind of famous in Ruby kind of stuff, and also founded Ember.js. He likes to say things like convention over configuration is another way of saying make easy things easy. I fully subscribe to this, and that's what makes me love Ember.js in the front end. I won't talk about that too much today. I'll keep it references to a minimum. Right, so let's get into the meat of the talk. Express. Who here knows about what Express is? Yeah, so pretty much it's one of these things that if you use Node as a backend to do HTTP, you're using Express, unless you've got an edge case or something funny that you want to be doing. It's lots of helpers, lots of useful things, but essentially it gets you something, syntax that kind of looks like this. So npm install express, normal node function here. You get this app.get structure. So this is just telling me that when somebody goes to the root of your application, so you can see the example down here, the curl, send them back a hello world. Simple, right? As we all know, these getting started guides are complete BS. they mean nothing compared to what the real world apps end up being. This is an example of what you might be able to do in a real world app. So again, we've got the normal kind of app.get. You've got a me endpoint that has a function declared in line that just returns the user from the session. Simple enough stuff. You can package things off into node packages and start getting a little bit more exciting and keeping separations of concerns up. Like here, you've got a routes analytics file that exposes a track event function that deals with the actual request. You can require that inline if you wanted to. You can also do fun things here like passing the Express app into a file that exposes a function, and inside that function it deals with all of your routes in it. And again, more layers of indirection here. You can have an index.js, an actual group of files that's processed by a particular module. This isn't an example of something that you could do in a proper node. This is an example of what we did do in one file. We had all of these different ways to define different routes all in one file. And yeah, that can get a little bit messy sometimes. So if you're making requests to the actual server, it's sometimes hard to really know where you should be looking for the file that's actually dealing with that request. So enter Express Autoroute. This is a module that I wrote myself just because I wanted to get a little bit more of a kind of unified way of defining our routes within the applications that we wrote in Bloo.ie. And it's a very kind of a simple syntax. I know a lot of people call this sort of stuff domain-specific languages. I've never used that to refer to Express Autoroute until this moment. But it's all it is inside a module file in Node. I'm not sure if any of you have ever written module files, but essentially you just have this module.exports object, and you can add things to that. To use Express Autoroute, all you need to do is expose an Autoroute object in a module, and that Autoroute object has to be structured in a very particular way. Very simple stuff. Top level is the name of the HTTP verb that you want to use, and then inside that you've got an object that defines a route to a function that handles it. Very kind of simple stuff. You can do interesting things. This is all normal Express code. You can set up a route that is defined as a string here, but it has things like, I think they call them params or URL segments. I'm not exactly sure what they call them in the Express world, but you can get access to these parts of the URL using something like rec.params. So if you don't know Express, rec is just the request that's coming in, and the params are attached to that. That allows you to have this kind of a structure where if you just go to the hello route, you get the normal hello world, but you can also kind of pass IDs and things like that into the request. And I really liked this syntax. I like the fact that you've got your hello entity. I suppose that's what people tend to call these sort of things. You've got a hello entity, and all of the getter routes for that hello entity are combined in one file, and you know where to go look for it. An interesting thing that we added to this was the ability to put this entity file, whatever you want to call it, into a particular folder. So you can see here, this file is actually in routes API, and then the file is goodbye.js. That prepends the folder that you're in to the front of the request URL. So you can see here, to get to this entity, you have to put API into the root. Simple kind of stuff, but it starts throwing up a few problems. If you're looking at this particular route here, you can see that this could be, being dealt with by the goodbye entity file, or it could be an everybody file that's just doing a get inside an API goodbye folder. So it's still not 100% clear what folder is doing, what file is actually doing the requests here. So although this was better at restructuring our endpoints, it's not the best solution. And one of the times that starts to break down is when you start getting these files a little bit more complicated. And one of the times that you're going to make these sorts of endpoint files a little bit more complicated is when you start to try and define a REST API. So what is REST? It stands for Representational State Transfer. I learned that last week when I was putting together this slide. I didn't know that was what it stood for. It was defined in the year 2000 by a guy called Roy Fielding. Again, I didn't know that until last week. But the real meat of what REST is how it works. And nobody really knows exactly what REST is. That kind of causes a few problems because there is no right way to do REST. There are some, well, I'm sure some people will tell you that there is a right way to do REST, and that's completely fine for them. If they want to say that REST is a predefined architecture that you have to follow each of the rules, that's up to them. Other people find it more productive to just think of REST as a communication structure. So when I want to talk to my server, I use HTTP verbs, and some people choose to use some of the stranger HTTP verbs, or in some cases I've seen them make up their own, which is a little bit bizarre. It doesn't matter what you do, just as long as you stick to one definition. For me, I like the way Ember.js does it. That's my second reference to Ember.js, and I'll try and keep them to a minimum. So Ember has this idea of Ember data. I won't go into it too much right now, but it is this data library, this data object notation. It's hard to actually describe exactly what it does, but essentially it's the thing that's dealing with your state and serializing that back and forth from the server. It means that you have to literally write no glue code when you want to save something to the server. And how it does that is it gives you all these helper things. It allows you to create an object, gives you a save function. And when you save a new object, it is going to create an object on the server, and that's going to send a post to the people endpoint. So they have this documented on one of they've got a great guide. So this is deep in the guide somewhere. And it's telling you exactly how you should write your REST endpoint for it to work as an Ember data HTTP server. So I followed this. This is exactly what I wanted to do. If we were to do Express, raw Express with this kind of REST that Ember gives, this is something along the lines of what you're going to write. It's got the getter, the getter is somewhere else. Actually, that's not even in here. It doesn't have a function to give you all of the books. In this case, it gives you something that you can create a book, you can get a particular ID. This is starting to get a bit messy, and it doesn't actually have anything in it that goes to get the book. It's just not even pseudocode. It doesn't really do anything. So let's clean it up a little bit. Let's use Express Autoroute. This is much cleaner because I cheated. I removed all the comments, so that's why it looks a lot cleaner. The problem with this is that it doesn't necessarily make the code any smaller, and it can still be the same sort of cumbersome problems that you have when you're just doing normal Express and a REST thing like that. So I decided I'd make another module. Enter Express. Express Autoroute JSON. I skipped over something there, which is actually quite important, which I'll come back to later on. The naive example here of just returning the books doesn't say anything about authentication authorization. So for you to do that, you need to have middleware methods that actually go off and check to see if you're allowed to see the particular book. If you're not familiar with Express, then you may not know what I'm talking about when I'm saying a middleware method, but that is exactly what Express is built upon. Express Autoroute supports middleware, so you just have to pass an array that is that particular endpoint. But I didn't like having to write that much code. I wanted to write simple definitions that say, this is a definition of what I want to return. Please do the rest for me. So I wrote Express Autoroute JSON. Now, Express Autoroute JSON is not independent of Express Autoroute. What it does for you is it builds that object that I showed you earlier on. It builds the getters, the setters, all that sort of stuff. So we still see the same stuff that we saw earlier on, where you're calling this Autoroute function, so that's coming from Express Autoroute. I've actually got this wrong. I'll update these and then I'll tweet a link to these slides if you want to get them, but I'll get this right once I do tweet that. But essentially, you're just doing an Autoroute, just the same as we saw before. But instead of doing this module exports Autoroute as being just a function, you're calling a function on it that returns that object for you. That function is Express Autoroute JSON, and you pass into it a model. One of the things that you get from convention over configuration is you don't have as many decisions. Express Autoroute JSON only works with Mongoose. Mongoose is a MongoDB ORM. ORM. Irish people say the word R, the letter R differently. So it's a MongoDB ORM. It's very hard for me. ODM, right, perfect. You saved my life there. So it's just an ODM that gives you linking and things like that between MongoDB entities, which is the sort of thing that you lose when you're doing NoSQL stuff. You pass that Mongoose model into the Autoroute function, and you define helpers. So in this case, we're defining find. And that actually works. The other examples that I gave you didn't work. They were just pseudocode. But that one there actually does work. So let's go back and have another look at that. That's all the code you need to output a chats endpoint. It will build the find. It will build the find by ID. And if you decide to add in authentication and authorization functions, it will set up all the middlewares for you. So you don't actually even have to write the boilerplate code. Even though it was very small boilerplate code, you don't have to even write any of that. So, well, yeah, caveat. One of the things that doesn't work on this is that even though the find works, the authorization and authentication works, I haven't implemented the saving parts of it yet. This module is probably about a month and a half old, and the reason why we haven't implemented any of those writing parts of it is because we don't need them. Our product that we released this Monday is an analytics engine, so all we're doing is reading from our database, and we're putting all that into graphs and things like that. So it's not going to be hard to implement post or delete, because most of the boilerplate is actually done already, most of the helper code. All the authorization and authentication is already done, so that's fine. If you are interested in using any of this stuff, let me know. You know, I'm not going to just implement them for the sake of implementing them if nobody's going to use them. But if somebody says, oh, I've got a use case for that, and actually would be a guinea pig, helper test for those, it's not going to be too hard to put them in. If anybody wants to try and implement them, talk to me again. I'll add you to the repo. I don't really mind about that sort of stuff. But also, I think I've got the date wrong here as well. Is it the 12th or the 14th of May? 12th of May. So 2 things wrong with this. So if you're coming along to the 12th of May, then I might be working away on those if I'm not around helping other people. But if anybody wants to pair with me while I throw in those writing functions, more than happy. And that's it. Bit of a whirlwind, but does anybody have any questions?
I think you've blown minds. I'm upset that the God of Nerves with
I heard that.
November.
Yeah, too many.
Just as a caveat, the reason Chris has mentioned member is coming back in July. We were talking about NodeJS. So
yeah.
He was trying to get these sales pitches early.
Yeah.
Really, no questions.
Did I go a little bit too fast?
So do you end up at the end, instead of having your roots all in like a roots file, you have the roots attached to the actual modules that they belong to? Is that
It's inverted to that. So you still have a roots folder, and you still have, for each root, you have, for each entity in REST, if that's the words you want to use. So book in this case, you'll have a file, and in that file it will define what mongoose model you're using, so where to go and get the data, but it will also define the specific authentication and authorization stuff in that file. So say if you had some entities that had different authentication schemes to others, you'd then, well, what we do in our case is we require in the authorization and the authentication stuff from other files. So, this is a particular type, and we'll just require it in and then set that as the authentication function on the Autoroute JSON object. One of the things I actually did when I was writing Express Autoroute JSON is I wrote the README first. So I wrote it the way I wanted to use it. So it's kind of like test-driven development for modules in a weird kind of a way. So there's a few things that I actually had to go in and change in the README. And actually, I wrote it in one way, and I wanted it to work that way, and I ended up implementing it a very slightly different way. So I created an issue in GitHub that's telling me to write it the way I wanted to write it. So it's a bit weird talking to myself in my own GitHub repo, but it was a good experience to write the README first, because actually when you're using modules like this, you don't care about how it's implemented, you're caring about how you're going to use it. And that's the most important thing. So that's why I put a lot of effort into that particular part of it. So there is an extensive README. The README does talk about features that aren't there yet, but there's a giant warning up the top that says these bits aren't there. Help, essentially.
Is the project public?
Project is public, yeah. It is on our Bloo.ie GitHub profile.
If you share links with me tomorrow, I'll make sure they go out.
Yeah, cool. I think if you go to my GitHub, you'll see that I'm participating in it. So I didn't think to put in the Bloo.ie GitHub one here. There's a few other bits and pieces in the Bloo.ie GitHub. Do you call it a repo? It's organization. And essentially bits like this that are helper modules we don't really care too much about, so we just develop them in the open, and it's not one of these things where we develop it internally and then dump it every so often. It's 100% in the open. So if you guys want to help with Express Autoroute JSON, you'll be developing in the same way that we generally develop inside Bloo.ie. So come work with us. Any other questions? No? Cool. All right. Short and sweet.
Thanks very much, Chris.